Hello everybody, welcome to Therapeutic Conversations, a 3-part series of conversations about the practice of family law in Singapore. This is a podcast organised by the Family Law and Children's Rights Working Group under the auspices of the Singapore Academy of Law's Professional Affairs and Membership Committee. The world of family law practice is wide and all-encompassing, and this podcast is a humble attempt at inviting candid discussions about family law practice and developing thought leadership in this area of law. This pilot series comprises informal conversations amongst the panelists about the family law ecosystem, with each podcast focusing on a specific topic of interest. If you enjoy this podcast, we hope you will subscribe or leave a review on your preferred podcasting platform, or visit www.sal.org.sg/blog/therapeutic conversations to join in the discussions. And now, on to the show.
Welcome everyone to the first episode of our podcast series. We will be discussing the topic, what might therapy look like in therapeutic justice? My name is Min Lim, Director of the Legal Aid Bureau, which provides free or low-cost services to the less privileged. I will be facilitating our conversation. With me are our two speakers, Angelina Hing from Integral Law and Dr. Xiao Yiting from Redwood Psychology. Let me tell you a bit more about them. Angelina was a district judge in the family courts from 2009 to 2016 and started Integral Law Chambers, a niche family law practice. Her firm's goal is to integrate expertise in law and therapeutic services to provide clients with balanced and holistic advice in navigating through their family disputes. Angelina is also the chairperson of the Family Law and Children's Rights Working Group under the Singapore Academy of Law. Welcome, Angelina. Dr. Yiting is a clinical psychologist and started Redwood Psychology, a private mental health practice that aims to make psychology accessible to all. She is a custody evaluator for the family justice courts and works with children and families in crisis. Prior to private practice, she had extensive experience in the public service working with youth and adult offenders and their families. Angelina and Dr. Yiting, can I invite you to say hello to our listeners?
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
All right. Let's start on the conversation. Therapeutic justice has been a real buzzword in recent years. So let's open the conversation by first talking about what we think therapeutic justice in the divorce context means. Angelina, perhaps you can go first.
Thanks, Min. Indeed, TJ has been the buzzword, and to me, it's important to understand the objective of any initiative before we can decide how to act on it. And for me, the objective of TJ in the context of divorce is really to protect the well-being of the children and the parents as much as possible during the whole divorce process. And to achieve this, all the players in the family justice ecosystem, namely lawyers, judges, therapists, and other professionals, have to play their part. And this is because we're not just dealing with legal issues, but human beings who are often very, very emotional. So we need to work together to get the parties to talk to each other constructively and settle where possible. And where it's not, we should try our best to understand what are the underlying concerns and issues which may be getting in the way and see if we can help them in overcoming these obstacles. And again, if amicable settlement is not possible, and often to my frustration, despite everyone's best efforts, then we want the court to deal with the matter efficiently and also to put in place therapeutic interventions like counselling and other programs to support the children and the family, which the courts are already doing.
Thank you, Angelina, for that very comprehensive explanation. Perhaps Dr. Yiting, can I invite you to give your take on therapeutic justice?
From the perspective of human behaviors in psychology, I can say with certainty there are two guarantees for couples and their children on the journey of divorce. Firstly, there will be intense emotions of pain and loss, regardless of the reasons for divorce. And secondly, post-divorce, there will be a period of adjustment for all parties involved. For some families, this period can be prolonged, and the unresolved acrimony between the parties continue to fester. The laws and processes and professionals that are involved in with these couples and children are set up to facilitate this difficult process, and they have the power to increase pain or minimize the contribution to the pain to the people right in the center of this divorce. And hence, we really have to look at divorce with the lens of that these are people involved. So my vision of TJ is that professionals working with these families will recognize that they have the power to escalate pain for their clients, but also have the power to minimize their contribution to the pain. They can do so by being empathic in the process of the divorce and guiding their clients to make better decisions for the long-term well-being of the children.
Thanks, Dr. Eating. So what we need is professionals to journey beside the parties involved in the divorce so that they can get out of the valley that they find themselves in, both before, during, and after court proceedings. But at this stage, it might be useful to clarify what exactly a therapist is, and specifically, what is the difference between a psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, and counselor in terms of what they do and how they're trained. Dr. Eating, perhaps you could share your thoughts on this?
Sure. I'm going to bring up this term called biopsychosocial model to explain the differences among these professionals. Bear with me as I go through what this model is. So when it comes to mental health disorders or any forms of human distress, there is this biopsychosocial model that talks about what are the factors that contributes to the pain. So the bio part is the biological aspect of things. It could be some defects in their genes or certain changes in their brain chemicals, or there are certain unbalanced hormones. These are your biological factors that contributes to pain. And this is where psychiatrists comes in a lot. Psychiatrists are actually medical doctors by profession, and what they do a lot is to prescribe pharmacological type of interventions. So any forms of medications can help with any of those causes that is more related to biological pain. So psychiatrists often have got less of a role to play when it comes to couples going through divorce, unless one of the parties is going through a significant issue in terms of their mental health disorder. So let me go on to talk about the psycho and social part of the factors that contributes to human distress and psychological disorders. So the psychological part is got to do with our own beliefs, our emotions, and behaviors. That's very based on the individual. While for the social aspect of how it contributes to pain is family relationships, the communication breakdowns, traumatic events that someone has gone through, or existing stresses such as work stress. So this is where psychologists and counselors who are trained in understanding human behaviors and also human relationships comes in. I guess the main difference you say is that for psychologists, they go through longer periods of formal school training as opposed to counselors. If you talk about in the field, they work very closely with clients who are going through personal distress, relationship distress, or even individual distress. Hence, in the context of what we're talking about for couples who are going through divorce, I would highly suggest to look out for psychologists and counselors who are well experienced working with couples, with children, and even in the area of divorce, who will be best placed with the experience and qualifications to work with this group of people.
Thanks, Dr. Eating. That was a really clear explanation, and I really liked that biological, social, psycho framework to explain the different expertise in all these professionals. Perhaps now let's talk about how a lawyer can work effectively with a therapist and vice versa. So we can hear from Angelina on this, who has extensive experience in working with such professionals. I'll ask a question in relation to the pre-divorce space, where parties are thinking of divorce but have not filed court proceedings yet. This is because once the matter is filed in court, the court provides services and therapeutic interventions where necessary. So the lawyer has to be a lot more proactive in the pre-divorce space. So Angelina, can you share how you've worked with these types of professionals for your pre-divorce cases, and how did it help?
Sure, indeed. It is true that in the pre-divorce space, lawyers play a very, very significant role because we are the main drivers of the matter, so to speak. And for me, in my experience, the mental health professionals that I find very helpful and work with would be particularly in a context when one party wants a divorce and the other party doesn't. So they really are on a different plane. And if we don't get that sorted, pre-writ, that literally means that it might very well lead to a contested divorce trial, which to me it's terrible, a terrible thing to happen. So for me, I think that is one scenario where I do work a therapist or psychologist, as Dr. Eating says, where what I do is to help my client process how he or she feels, especially if he's the one that or she's the one that doesn't want a divorce, and to process the thoughts behind that and the reluctance behind that. And of course, legal advice, the legal process, I will cover all of that. But when I find that my client is in a place where there's trauma, for example, or deep fears, deep-seated fears that is causing the reluctance to accept that the marriage has broken down, that's when I would handhold and would liaise with a therapist or encourage my client to see a therapist that he or she is comfortable with to sort of process those emotions.
Okay, and that sounds very helpful. If a lawyer does want to consult a therapist to help with a case like you've done, Angelina, what is the best way to find one?
First of all, the consultation needs to be with the consent of the client because we are all bound by our own confidentiality obligations. Second is to reach out to the fellow professional across the table to see if they are comfortable working hand in glove. And honestly, in a situation where it's my client that needs to process, I usually don't need to get involved because that professional working across the table from me, we're actually working towards the same place. My challenge is actually working with professionals that is not pulling the same way. Another example I can give is a psychiatrist, that a situation where I had to consult with a psychiatrist because this was a litigated case and my client was suffering from depression and the father thought, my client was the mother, and the father thought that this would hinder her ability to care for the child and therefore it would potentially lead to a contested custody case. And so what I had to do was to convince my opponent to meet with the doctor, of course to convince the doctor to see if the doctor is prepared to meet with us in the first place. And the three of us sit down and have an understanding how my client is and whether or not her emotional state is suitable to be the primary caregiver of the child. And I thought that was a very productive conversation with professionals around the table, with the father's lawyer, the mother's lawyer, and then understanding from the professional himself as to the state of mind of the depressed person. And I thought that really cut through a lot of issues that would potentially take months and months and months of litigation to uncover.
Yes, indeed. What strikes me about that anecdote is how much trust all three parties needed to have in each other, the lawyers in each other and also in the psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist in both lawyers, because it could potentially go quite wrong. Finding the right people that you can trust is the challenge, isn't it? Perhaps, Dr. Eating, you could share with us, how would a lawyer who is looking for a therapist for his client be able to find one?
Well, here in Singapore, we don't have an association or the regulation of therapists at this moment in time. I think as what Angelina has mentioned, what is really helpful is for the various professionals, whether lawyers or therapists, to look out for the other types of professionals that to really link up and speak to them and to see whether they can work together, because they have to be working along the same directions in order to be able to work it out for the clients. So I don't have a quick tip right now, like there's no directory for you to go to, but it is about getting to know professionals from the other side and having that conversation with them.
Perhaps we should have a mixer where lawyers can meet.
I would love that.
Yeah, such professionals. Okay, interesting. All right, another question for Angelina. Can you share from your own experience in working with clients in the pre-divorce space? What can a lawyer do to persuade his or her client, or the client's spouse if need be, to go for therapy and get the most benefit from it? Because I do think in our society right now, acceptance of the need for therapy and knowledge of the value of therapy is not quite there, I think.
I agree. I think for me, I actually take some time to listen to them, to understand what they're struggling with. And of course, I have to cover the legal aspects of the consult with me. But because I take time to listen to their fears, their concerns, and I take the effort to elicit those information out from them. I also then am in a position to explain to them that to embark on the legal process is a stressful one, and they have to be emotionally ready for that. In fact, if I would take a back step, what I usually do is to encourage them to engage their spouse before taking any legal action. But in order to engage a spouse, actually the client himself or herself needs to be emotionally stable and clear as to what he or she wants. Otherwise, it's difficult to have a conversation as difficult as a possible divorce with the estranged spouse. So what I do is to process that with the client and to explain that in order for, if I find that or observe that my client is rather stuck emotionally and there are rather deep-seated issues that need to be processed, and that's when I would then explain the benefit of seeing a therapist to work through and process those emotions so that there's clarity in their minds before they begin to engage or even before they decide to take any legal action.
Okay. That must be a pretty tough and time-consuming conversation.
I think with everything, it gets better with practice. But I also think that there has to be intentionality, that as a family law practitioner, if you want to be intentional about it, you will achieve that, you know.
Well, you need to be very empathetic, I think. Conversely, for the same scenario, i.e. the pre-divorce space, how can a therapist help a client to work better with his lawyer? So, for example, the lawyer may need the client to give him or her sufficient information in order to give them proper legal advice, or may need the client to listen to legal advice, but the client may not be ready to do so, keeps crying at all the consults and so on, and the lawyer may feel that I'm just not getting anywhere with this case. So how can the therapist help the client in this regard? Dr. Eating?
I think one of the things that we do definitely pre-divorce is to, similarly what Angelina has mentioned, is to let them know that the divorce process is a period of time. You don't know how long it takes. Sometimes it can take months or even years. And this whole period can be very, very stressful. So for them to go through that period, they need to be emotionally ready to be able to go through that. And also to paint the picture to them that when you don't have a talking relationship or communication with the other party, it often turns out to be quite acrimonious and it's even more stressful. We can paint a possibility that it's going to be much, much worse down the road. And often when people hear that at pre-divorce, they tend to pause and stop and to think more whether they really want to go down this path. So at the pre-divorce stage, usually that's what I do with clients. Also, the other thing is that as we talk about their decision to whether to go for divorce or not, if they finally come to a decision that they want a divorce, what often helps is to get them to consider mediation or working with a lawyer who is more collaborative in terms of their practice, because that again reduces the stress of the whole divorce process. So that's how I encourage clients at the pre-divorce stage to work with their lawyers.
It sounds like the relationship between the therapist and the client also has to be very close and based on trust as well, in order for you to bring them to that level of clarity and calm. I want to discuss a tricky issue which might come up when appointing a therapist. Let's say there are no court proceedings filed, but the wife or mother consults a therapist, or it could be the husband or father, and seeing the therapist for a few sessions, and they do have this relationship of trust. Then that spouse tells the other spouse that he or she intends to start court proceedings if they cannot reconcile their differences. So at that stage, the other spouse might be open to seeing a therapist and resolving the matter amicably, but might feel that the therapist may be biased towards the original spouse, the spouse who was the original client. So in the circumstances, would it be best for the spouse who hired this therapist to stop seeing that therapist and appoint another one jointly with the other spouse? I mean, what would be the best way to manage this situation?
We will always see the couple together most of the time. We seldom engage in practices where we're seeing one party for a prolonged period of time. And the main reason is because we want to avoid any forms of secrecy or perceived biasness towards or against one party. So that's talking about a usual couple therapy where both parties are still committed to each other, wanting to work out their marriage. So what more when we talk about a couple that's looking at divorce? There's already hostility or acrimony between them, definitely distrust between them. So in order to prevent any misunderstanding between the two of them, I would say that even though one party feels really comfortable with his or her therapist, it is always encouraged that if both of them decide to see a therapist together, they find a separate one.
Thanks. Yeah, I suppose that would be the least controversial way of doing things. What do you think about that, Angelina?
No, I agree, and I'm aware of the dilemma that a therapist has when that sort of potential conflict situation comes about. But I think I would also want to add that, seeing a therapist is actually a very personal thing, and chemistry is absolutely important for the couple. And sometimes if one of the couple feels comfortable but the other person doesn't, it quite often poses a challenge even for the therapist himself or herself. Yeah.
And there is a reason why, like both parties cannot have the same lawyer, right? Another area that I think would be interesting for our listeners to think about is whether children should see a therapist to help them cope with the psychological distress of the divorce and its aftermath. Once again, I am talking about the pre-divorce space. Dr. Eating, what are the signs that it would be important for the children to see a therapist in a family breakdown situation? What would the therapist be able to do for the children? Because I think in a lot of divorcing cases, the parents are so caught up in their own issues that they aren't really thinking, oh, should I send the children for therapy? And often they don't tell the children things, until they've decided, which may be quite some time down the line.
Yeah, you're right. So the parents may not verbally tell the children what's going on, but children are very sensitive. They can tell from the non-verbal behaviors from the parents that there is something going on. And hence, coming back to your question about what are some signs to look out for when for children, I would say the signs such as them maybe having separation anxiety from either parent, sometimes having lower moods, maybe they're refusing school, they're refusing certain activities that they're usually interested in, maybe they're into sports but suddenly there's a sudden drop in interest, things such as certain irrational fears, suddenly they're very fearful of something, that there's something that they've never been afraid of, or even regression. So some children say somebody who's at the age of 10 suddenly behaving like a 5-year-old. So these are all the different signs that you can tell that a child is going through distress. And I guess in a family whereby there's a lot of conflicts between the parents, that could be a major contributor to a child's distress. And in that situation, it would be really helpful for a child to go for individual therapy, especially if the parents are not in the right mind to be able to parent their child as much as they used to. Especially for parents who are considering divorce, children always feel quite caught in the middle. They really do. They are afraid that if they were to be spending more time with one parent, it's pushing the other parent off. And so all children should never be placed in that kind of position. Hence, having a therapist for them to speak to, share about their fears, that's very, very helpful for them to go through that period. Because parents may not be willing and ready to hear what the children actually have to say about what's going on at home.
Does it worry you if there is a situation where the children seem very aligned with either parent? Do you think that's a cause of concern?
I think it depends on the context of that. That just by itself, I can't really tell you whether there's anything wrong or anything good about that. It all depends on what's the family environment. Was this child closer to this particular parent always, and this is just the usual state, or is there a sudden switch in terms of how close this child is? Has anything happened? Has one parent threatened something to the child? Has there been any forms of coercion and all that? We don't know. But what I can say is that for that situation that you mentioned, I can't tell unless we understand what's going on for the family and the child.
Okay. And I suppose if children do not get the opportunity to see a therapist and they just live with this hurt, there may be long-term implications of that in your experience?
Definitely. Research has actually shown that children who go through high conflict divorce, they usually have poorer outcomes later in life. But if parents who go through divorce, but they can co-parent cooperatively, it does not cause any disadvantage for the children. So it doesn't mean that children of divorced families will turn out badly. It is really how the parents relate to each other throughout the whole process that makes that difference for the children.
Makes sense. Angelina, when do you think you would suggest therapy for the children? Because you're really interacting just with your client, either the mother or the father. And you may or may not see the children. I don't know if you have a practice of wanting to speak to the children yourself or you don't. And in which case, would you be able to pick up that this is a situation where perhaps the child may be in need of therapy?
For me, part of the conversation that I would have with my client would be to ask how the children are and to ask if there has been any behavioral changes and why. And so that's actually part of the questions that I would ask and ascertain. So in that sense, I will get some sense as to what's happening on the children. And that's when I would actually recommend that they bring the child to see a therapist if I find that something's really amiss or different. But I wanted to add this, and that's something really close to my heart, and that is this. The situation that Dr. Eating had talked about where parents are so overwhelmed and they can't properly parent their children, and because they are just so caught up emotionally with the conflict with each other. And from in the legal world, that usually results in a contested custody application. And I think that all the more for these sort of situations that Dr. Eating was just talking about, is so important for the lawyers of the mother and the lawyer of the father and the child therapist to find a space to sit down and talk about the issues through the eyes of the child, which the therapist would be able to share. And I think if the day comes where we can do that, I think we will save a lot of children from unnecessary angst and potential long-term trauma and therapy. And I think we will have a lot more happier children, even in divorce situations.
Very interesting suggestion, which does segue into my last question for both of you, which is if you had a wish list on what could be done to make therapeutic justice a greater reality, what would it be? So Angelina, you've started that off by saying, I wish everyone could have better conversations with each other. But in practice, how do you see that actually being able to be a reality?
It's going to say breaking down walls, and practically how that would happen, I think, is somebody has to do the reaching out first and not wait for the other.
So whoever it is, whether it's the lawyer or therapist,
pick up the phone, reach across the other fence and see how far you go from there. But of course, like I said, I'm totally aware of the issues of trust, the fears, the apprehension as to who will use what against who where, those kind of questions. But I think it can be worked through, but certainly with the consent of the parents. That is vital and crucial.
I suppose what we would need is a set of ground rules for that conversation, isn't it? Just like there's a set of ground rules for mediation, where we tell all parties it's confidential and then you can't use it in other proceedings and what the purpose is and so on. Yeah, but fascinating idea. Thank you, Angelina. How about you, Dr. Eating, your wish list?
I'm going to second Angelina's one. But she said what she needs to, so I'm not going to elaborate on that. I really would love that idea to happen. So for myself, I think the wish list would be that every professional who is in this whole process of the divorce process, whether it's therapists, whether it's lawyers, to realize that we have so much power actually in our hands to help or to cause harm, further harm for a couple that's going through the whole divorce process. And I hope that we will consider this power that we have and to use it rightly to bring about some forms of therapy itself can work, but more of that, they have the healing. You're right, the word is healing. The healing to this whole journey to make it less painful.
Just a follow-up question. What's your understanding of how much professionals, therapists, understand about the legal system, how it works, and what lawyers do, and so on? And do you think this level of understanding, correlates with how willing therapists would be to work with lawyers?
I'll speak for myself and some people whom I know who has at least worked with lawyers. I think I know some about the whole legal process, but it takes effort to understand. I would say a lot of it is still somewhat foreign to me. The processes, how long it takes, what happens, if you were to file for this and then, the various things. So I think definitely there's value for therapists to understand what it takes to go through the process, because they can preempt, they can work with the clients to go through this process better. And I'll say perhaps for most therapists who do not work with lawyers, they wouldn't have any training or formal training or understanding of how this works. So I think it will really benefit for us to just reach across to know what each other do so that we can complement each other's work better.
Thanks very much, Angelina and Dr. Eating, for all the interesting information and insights you've shared. I, for one, have learned a lot from our conversation. With that, we'll bring this conversation to a close. For our listeners who are interested in how therapeutic justice is practiced in the youth court, I would like to invite you to a seminar which the Singapore Academy of Law is organising on the 16th of May 2023. The details are on the SAL website. See you there then. We hope everyone tunes in for the next podcast episode.
Thank you for tuning in to Therapeutic Conversations, where we explore the practice of family law in Singapore through candid and thought-provoking discussions. We hope this episode has provided you with valuable insights into how therapy looks like in family law, in particular therapeutic justice. The next episode will focus on family practice, where we'll dive deep into the changing landscape of family law, as well as some words of wisdom on what it takes to succeed as a family law practitioner. If you have enjoyed the content so far, we hope you will subscribe or leave a review on your preferred podcasting platform, or visit www.sal.org.sg/blog/therapeutic conversations to join in the discussion. Once again, thank you for tuning in to Therapeutic Conversations, a podcast organised by the Family Law and Children's Rights Working Group under the auspices of the Singapore Academy of Law's Professional Affairs and Membership Committee.